Hey there, my fellow lunatics, and welcome to Dakon's Madhouse. Alright, everybody, today we are going to be taking a look at starter level Helms, and just like the starter level chests and just like the starter level pants, I got a surprise preview for everybody today, so be sure to stick through it as it's somewhere in the middle. Alright, and let's go ahead and get started with the rules, and without further ado, let's go. Number 1, all of the items are at their starting level. There are no item level upgrades. None of the items are reinforced. I have noticed that at lower levels, a lot of people tend not to reinforce their items, so I'm going to assume that you don't have the resources, or you just keep forgetting to reinforce. Number 3, I take into account at what point in the game the item is normally going to be found. So for example, the copper sword is more useful in the early game than in the late game, so I'm rating things with this kind of consideration in mind. Number 4, different playstyles can alter the ranking of various weapons for different people. Now, I'm going to try to stay neutral and take all these different playstyles into account, but I must admit, I have a bit of a bias toward fast attack speed weapons that hit more often than single shot attacks that do more damage in a single blow. I'm going to do my best not to let that get the better of me though. With that out of the way, let's take a quick look at the rating system in general and what each tier means. Starting with the S tier. This is the top tier. These are going to be our super versatile items, best of the best, things that are used in multiple builds. A tier, those are going to be excellent items. Top tier for at least one build, and often versatile, but not necessarily the best of the best. B tier are strong items that you really aren't going to complain about, but they have limited use or are eventually outclassed by other items. C tier, these items are fine. You can't go wrong with them, but you will eventually replace them, or you are going to replace them pretty quickly. D tier, maybe these items have a little bit of a niche use, but otherwise they're really not that useful or worthwhile. And F tier, the item is trash, it's not any good, don't bother using it. Alright, we're going to start off strong with the Adventurer's Helm, going straight into S tier. This is an early game item, it's a general item, and general items do really well during the early game. And this, wow, God, it does so much. So once you get your hands on this, you're definitely going to want to equip it. The Assassin's Hood is going to start us off in the C tier category here because it's not that bad, and if you don't have the ninja stuff, then it's definitely a good option. The Atlantean Worm Helm, well, baby, this one is going right into S tier, as this is probably the best helmet in the game. The Bronze Helm, also a really strong helmet, going into the A tier, as this is the best early mining helmet that there is pre-wall. It also is pretty good for melee as well. The Carapace Helm, I'm throwing this into D tier just because it is a little gimmicky. I can see this helm working in like one very niche Grubzuka mining build, but that's pretty much it. The Caveling Hood is going into C tier, as this is a pretty decent dodge and melee helm for the early game. However, it's an easy upgrade from Peasant, but dodge really isn't that great in the early game in general. The Cooking Pot Lid, this one is also going into C tier, as its armor is pretty good for its level. In fact, it's actually excellent. The crit bonus is not that great. The food drain, though, is kind of nice if you're having a hard time finding food. The set bonus isn't that bad either. Not bad for the early game, but once you've got your food under control, this thing loses its luster. The Copper Helm, this one also going into C tier, and it's barely an upgrade from wooden armor, but hey, you know what? It's still pretty good for starter gear. The Cosmos Visor, I'm throwing this one into B tier, as it is a solid mining and melee helm, although it is better for end game than it is at the point that you get it, although you get it pretty close into the late game, so it's not long before you'll find good use for this. The diving helm I'm throwing into D tier because it's not bad. It's just really good for fishing. And in the early game, when you're leveling your fishing, at least in the early access, you don't want to catch fish. You actually want to catch trash to be able to level up faster. And this helps you catch fish. So it's not as useful in the early game as it is maybe in the late game. The farmer's hat. This one is a B tier hat. The hit point regen on this is awesome. Now, it is primarily a harvest helmet, and it's going to help you with your planting and your crops. But holy crap, that hit point regen, that's useful. The festive hat, though, not as useful. Going into D tier, the stats really aren't that bad for the level that you can get it at, but unless you start the game with the winter holiday going, you're likely going to find better by the time you get this hat. The Frankenbrute head is going into B tier as it has got the best armor and the best hit point boost for a helm for the early game. The knockback isn't bad either. The Galaxite helm I'm throwing into A tier as it is a very, very strong crit helm and it's craftable. What more do you want? The Gingerbread hood, this one is unfortunately D tier. The stats are poor, the attack speed boost just really isn't worth it. It's just too low. And the Gingerbread mask is no better, also going into D tier with poor stats and a really crappy food drain buff that really isn't that big of a deal. So yeah, don't bother with this. It looks good for vanity, though. Put it in your wardrobe instead. The God Sent King mask, I'm putting this one into A tier as it is an excellent mask. It's got great stats. The boost to soul power is awesome. And the only thing really keeping it from S tier is the fact that it has a terrible set bonus. The Hazmat helm I'm putting into C tier. I think the stats on it are fine, but there are just so many better melee helms that you get at about the same time that unless you're lucky enough to get this one first, you're going to use the others instead. The Hivebone helm also goes into C tier as the hit points and the armor for it are decent. The attack speed for it really isn't that bad either, but the Thorns is a bit wasted at this point in the game unless you happen to be getting hit a lot. If you're having a hard time and you're getting hit all the time, then yeah, the Hivebone helm, it's got some good use to it. The Hunter's Hood is going right into A tier as this is one of the best mid-game range helms in the game. It's also really good for dodge builds as well. The Iron Helm, I love this thing. It's going right into S tier. It is one of the best early game helms, and it is good for any and all builds. You're going to want to put it on as soon as possible. The King Slime Crown. Oh man, I actually was prepared to make this a D tier or an F tier, but it's actually going into A tier. It is really about the same as the Frankenbrute when it comes to stats, plus it adds crit chance. Now, the set bonus is hit or miss, but it can be useful if you want to avoid fights. Where will the Larva Helm go on this tree? It's going into C tier because it's a pretty decent mining helm, and frankly, it's only better than the Bronze if you lack any other mining gear. Otherwise, the Bronze is better, but it's still pretty good. The Magma Horn Helm I'm putting into B tier as it is not the burning helm, but it is one of the top burning helms. Turns out there's actually two burning helms, so we're going to talk about the other one in just a second. But first, we have got the Mercenary Headband, which really surprised me. I'm throwing this one into S tier, as I think it is the best mid-game dodge helm, and the stats for it are excellent in general for any build. The Miner's Protective Helm is also going into S tier, as it is the best mining helm. It's a pretty good melee helm too, and the glow is useful, and the set bonus is also great. Can't go wrong with this helm. The Mold Web Helm. This one is C tier as it's got a pretty decent melee speed boost, but the set bonus, not all that great. You can get it from food. The Ninja Cowl right into S tier. Second best helm in the game, one of the top ones, and definitely the best of the dodge helms. We have got the Octarine Helm, and this one I'm putting into C tier as well, as it's actually a pretty solid helm for mid to late game mining speed builds. Omeros Helm, this one is a bit of a toss-up for me. I'd go back and forth on it between A tier and S tier. I'm going to go ahead and put it into S tier just because I'm being generous today, because it's just a really, really good helm with just a whole lot of useful skills on it. The Paladin Mask. You know, I remember when Paladin gear was amazing and it was the armor to wear, but these days it's C tier at best. You know, I mean, if you don't have the ninja set yet, then yeah, this is pretty good for that mid-late game, but it just doesn't compare to the ninja armor. The Peasant's Hat, right into the D tier. It is the first dodge hat that you might find, and it's really not all that great, and it's quickly replaced with the Caveling Hood. The Plague Mask, wow, this one S tier, right through and through. It's got excellent hit points, it's got excellent armor, its damage boost makes it excellent for any build, and you practically get a free res on death. Not guaranteed, but a high chance, well, a chance. And makes it excellent in my book. I'll take it. The Pot Lid, this one is going into A tier. I was rather surprised myself. It's got a really good armor bonus, an excellent crit bonus that's good for pretty much any build, though it does lose its effectiveness as the game progresses. It's really an early game item. The Pumpkin Head I'm going to actually put into C tier. It's got pretty good hit point and armor boost. The glow's not bad either, but unfortunately it just doesn't do anything offensive. The Radical Rabbit Ears, these guys are A tier when you get them. I mean, if you're a melee dodge, then this is better than the Hunter's Hood. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have our final preview item before 1.0. I give you the Apprentice Hat, and this one is going straight into A tier. It's got extra magic damage. It's got magic barrier to help boost your hit points. And the set bonus is just, it is an excellent early game magic hat, and I definitely think that this whole set is an excellent early game magic hat. All right, well, there are so many good helms in this game, and the good ones just keep on coming, as we've got the Ranger Hood going right into A tier. This is, in my opinion, one of the best ranged helms. You just got to keep it upgraded, and it will stay useful from start to finish. The Scarab Visor, this one is a 100% A tier item. Thorns is really strong, especially in the late game, end game, which is when you get this. And the set bonus is just killer. So definitely keep an eye on for this one. The Scarlet Helm, like its other pieces of armor, is an S tier item. It's got great hit points. It's got decent armor, not the best for its level, but its crit chance is great. The set bonus is great, and it's useful for pretty much any build. At the point that you get it, Scarlet armor, especially being craftable, top notch. The Scholar's Hood, though, not so good. I'm taking that down to a D tier. Well, it's really not that bad. I just think it's confused. It's got a low armor, low dodge chance. The range speed is feeling a little kind of meh, and the set bonus is just a little gimmicky. It feels weird. The Sentry Helm I'm actually throwing into C tier, as it is a really, really solid defensive helm. Because of its bonus against bosses, it's best used against bosses, but it's pretty good even if you don't take the defense against bosses into consideration. The Shaman Skull, this one is A tier, as it is really, really good. And even though burn isn't at the best at this point in the game, you can really churn out some decent damage just because of its secondary ability that instantly knocks out all the burn that you're doing. That kind of burst damage makes it really strong no matter what kind of build you're using, even if you're not focusing on burn, especially if you've got the cat. The Shroomman Cap, this one is a C tier helm, as some of its stats really aren't that bad. The food buff is useful when food is scarce though, and at the time that you get it, food will be a little scarce, but you're gonna eventually have a farm going and then you won't need this anymore. The Skirmisher cap I'm throwing into B tier as it is just a really, really helpful ranged speed helm. The Slime Helm going right into A tier as it is just a general stat helm that is good for pretty much any build. It is just a shame that the set bonus is trash. The Snowman Helm, I'm actually putting this one into B tier. It has one of the best armors for the early game, and it makes it a great early game helm, but unless you start with winter going, then you're probably not going to acquire it early enough to make it worthwhile. But if you do, it's good. The Solarite Barbute, this one is A tier. It is one of the top melee helms in the game, and it is craftable, so that makes it really useful. The Spooky Blanket, though, this hood is going right into D tier as the dodge is good, but the extra 1% dodge that you gain really isn't worth losing all the other stats that the Caveling hat will give you just to gain some movement speed. The sunglasses, these are also going into D tier. There is no denying that the sunglasses are good for dodge and nothing else. The Wild Warden mask, I'm putting this one into B tier as if you're not using the Owl Lux, this is great. And at the early game, you're probably not using the Owl Lux. Therefore, this is a really great helm. And finally, we're going to finish up with the Wood Helm, which I'm also throwing into C tier. It is going to be the first helm that you make. It is simple and it works. And that wraps everything up for today's episode. If you enjoyed yourself, please be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe if you're interested in watching my videos regularly. And if you feel like adding some extra support to the channel, you can always join our Patreon or become a YouTube member. There are links in the description. Thanks again for watching. You're all wonderful, and until next time, stay crazy.